Welcome back. Today it's part 2 of my series on perfect albums, and I'm sure you all knew I was going to do some Beatles at some point, so I decided to go with A Hard Day's Night. Now, I know the obvious thing would have been to do Sgt. Pepper or Abbey Road, something later, but I have to say, the older I get, I find myself going back to the early Beatles more and more. There's just something about the freshness and raw exuberance of this music that's tough to beat. This is a pop masterpiece. Okay, that being said, let's do it.
It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night, I should be sleeping like a log.
Leave it to the Beatles to have created not only what is certainly rock and roll's most iconic album ending chord from A Day in the Life on the Sgt. Pepper album, as well as what is probably rock's most iconic album opening chord, that crazy thing we just heard that kicks off A Hard Day's Night. This chord has been discussed and debated endlessly by music geeks over the years. It's actually kind of funny. There are many videos on YouTube dedicated simply to decoding it, figuring out what instruments are involved, who's playing what. Here's what George Harrison had to say about it when asked by a reporter.
It wasn't just George Harrison's views and philosophy that were covered at the press conference. Someone had always wondered how to play the opening chord of A Hard Day's Night.
To answer your question, it's F with a G on the first string.
Thank you very much.
Your little finger.
Thank you very much.
Sounds better on a 12 string.
I love that clip so much. Now, here's the chord that George just described. Sure enough, it's an F major. I'm thumbing the bass, and as he said, the little finger plays the G on the top string. Now, a couple of people are saying that it's a G bass note, but I disagree. Both George and John play this chord. Again, as he mentioned, George on his 12 string, which does sound awesome. John's doing it on an acoustic guitar. Paul has the easiest job here. He just hits a simple D note on his bass, and Beatles producer George Martin, who contributed so much to their music at times, plays a really cool chord on the piano, which goes from left to right, D, G, D, G, C. You put that all together and you've got what I'm going to call G 11th. Now, because Paul plays D on his bass, it's tempting to think of that as the root note, but I think G is more accurate. The song is in the key of G major. Once the verse starts, it begins on the G major chord. It's been a hard day's night. And of course, there'll be no shortage of people who will disagree with some of what I've laid out here, but I think this is pretty darn close. By the way, the song's title, and by extension the album's title, came from a malapropism of Ringo Starr. He was famous for that, kind of like the old baseball player Yogi Berra, for those of you who are familiar with him. They both had a way of saying things in a sort of awkward, homespun way that were very pithy when you thought about them. After a particularly grueling session that extended into the wee hours, Ringo exclaimed, "That's a hard day's night, that was." And the band loved it so much they decided to use it for a title. Track number 2 is I Should Have Known Better, written by John. Incidentally, A Hard Day's Night is the first Beatles album to include all original material. I think it was the first great leap forward for the band. Don't get me wrong, I love the first 2 albums, Please Please Me and With the Beatles. But for me, the band just sounds a bit more mature and confident on this one. Clocking in at a whopping 2 minutes 44 seconds, this is the album's longest track. How hilarious is that? And I got to say, that's another thing about the early Beatles that I really like. They would get away from that later on, of course, but get in, say what you have to say, and get out. There's a lot to be said for that. This is the last Beatles song to feature a harmonica intro from John. And that was yet another great thing about this group. They had an amazing instinct for knowing when something had been played out and when it was time to move on and do something brand new. Like the title track, this one also features George Harrison on the 12-string guitar. He plays a nice little solo. Like so many things the Beatles did, the use of the 12-string was hugely influential. Roger McGuinn of the Byrds saw George play the instrument in the film Hard Day's Night, ran out and bought one, and essentially built a career off that sound. Next up is what is probably my favorite track from the album, If I Fell, a beautiful ballad written by John. And that's interesting in itself, right? We usually think of McCartney as the balladeer of the Beatles. Lennon was quoted as saying, "That's my first attempt at a ballad proper. It shows that I wrote sentimental love ballads way back when." McCartney claims to have contributed to the song, and I'm sure he probably did. Like all of the songs on side one of this album, If I Fell was included in the Hard Day's Night movie. Apparently, when they recorded their very Everly Brothers-like harmonies, John and Paul actually shared a single microphone. Pretty cool. The chord progression is kind of kooky in the coolest possible way. Every once in a while, the Beatles would like to tack on a sort of old-school introduction on their songs. This is a great example. Here, There, and Everywhere from Revolver is another one. It never reappears in the rest of the song. If I fell in love with you, would you promise to be true and help me understand? What we just heard there was in the key of D flat major. It starts on the 2 chord, E flat minor, down a half step to D major. That's an interesting chord, not of the key, but that leads chromatically down into the 1 chord, D flat. How do we explain that D major? I look at that as something called a flat 5 substitution. A more conventional way to have done that intro would be to go E flat minor and then to A flat 7 instead of the D, and then to the 1 chord of D flat. So D is the flatted 5th of A flat. So therefore we call D the flat 5 substitution of the A flat. And it gives you that nice fret by fret movement. We call that chromaticism down to the 1 chord. Now we go back to the E flat minor, back to the D. We assume we're going to get a repeat. But instead of going down a half step to the D flat again, we go up a whole step to E minor, and that signals a key change. E minor starts a 2-5-1 progression that will lead us to D major, and that will be our new key for the verse. E minor is the 2 chord, A is the 5 chord, and then D is our new 1 chord. And these are some of my favorite harmonies that John and Paul ever did. Unlike some groups that use parallel harmony all the time, say one guy sings a root and the other guy sings a 5th for every single note, these are much more intricate. Just take the opening line. John's part ascends throughout. If I give my heart, whereas Paul's dips at the end. If I give my heart.
If I give my heart to you, I must be sure from the very start that you would love me more than her.
Next up is George Harrison's first and only lead vocal performance on this album, I'm Happy Just to Dance with You, although the song was written by Lennon and McCartney specifically for George to sing. Now that's kind of unusual. John and Paul did that a lot for Ringo. Generally, they would throw him a song on just about every album to sing, but not so with George. Generally, if he wrote it, he would sing it, and that was that. Neither John nor Paul thought very highly of the song. They could sometimes be very critical of their own work, especially John. But of course, it's the Beatles, so it's a great little piece of pop. It uses a major verse and a minor chorus. That's a little songwriting trick they would use elsewhere. And the lyrics typify that youthful naivete that characterizes so much of the early Beatles. I don't want to kiss or hold your hand. If it's funny, try and understand. There is really nothing else I'd rather do because I'm happy just to dance with you. The next tune is another all-time classic ballad, and this one is mostly Paul's baby, And I Love Her. John Lennon called it Paul's first Yesterday, and Paul said it was his first ballad that he was proud of. But like so many Beatles tunes, it wasn't a solo effort by any means. Apparently, John had a lot to do with the bridge. A love like ours could never die. And George Harrison contributed that simple but amazing guitar riff played on the nylon string acoustic guitar, which is really one of the main hooks of the song. The vocal melody is a great example of Dorian mode, F-sharp Dorian to be exact. Dorian mode is known for the fact that it has a raised sixth but a flatted seventh, and the melody makes liberal use of that raised sixth. Root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there it is. I give her all my love, that's all I do. There's a great sneaky little key change heading into the guitar solo. The first three verses all end on a nice E6 chord and then resolve back to the one chord F-sharp minor. But leading into the solo, they make it all the way to the E6 chord, and instead of moving up the expected whole step to the F-sharp minor, they randomly jump up 1.5 steps to G minor. It really adds to the emotional intensity. See if you can hear it. F-sharp minor, C-sharp minor, F-sharp minor, C-sharp minor, A, B, here comes the E6. Great effect. John's raucous Tell Me Why brings up the mood considerably. Lennon described it as resembling a black New York girl group type of song with its doo-wop chord progression and three-part harmony. Interestingly, Lennon takes the high part in this harmony. It's usually Paul way up top there, but not in this case. Paul plays a great walking bass line on this. It's a shame that the bass on Beatle records really didn't become more prominent till around Rubber Soul or Revolver. And a fun little piece of trivia, in the film sequence for this song, the Beatles mime to the record, supposedly playing on stage to a crowd of adoring fans. Now that crowd included 350 paid audience members, one of which was a very young Phil Collins. And finally, side one ends with another rocker, Paul's Can't Buy Me Love, which had already been released as a single prior to appearing on this album. The story goes that the band were staying in Paris at the 5-star George V Hotel, and requested that an upright piano be brought to their room so that they could continue songwriting. It's amazing the work ethic these guys had. They were feeling pressure to follow up their previous single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which had hit number 1. And apparently it was during this hotel session that Can't Buy Me Love was written. The song basically follows a 12-bar blues structure, pretty rare for the Beatles, although being the Beatles, it doesn't sound like blues at all. It sounds like rock and roll. George Martin came up with the idea of slightly altering the chorus to create the little tag that begins and ends the song. Pretty cool idea there. And by the way, if the band were worried about following up I Want to Hold Your Hand, they needn't have worried. This one was a huge success as well. It spent 5 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100. George turns in another nice guitar solo and a great vocal from Paul. This was back in the days when he could really belt it out.
Can't buy me love, love, can't buy me love. I'll buy you a diamond ring, my friend, if that makes you feel alright. I'll get you anything, my friend, if it makes you feel alright.
Side 2 opens with a kind of mid-tempo rocker, Anytime at All, written primarily by Lennon, who described it as an effort at rewriting It Won't Be Long. That was from the With the Beatles album. Same ilk, C to A minor with me shouting, which is pretty funny because C to A minor appears nowhere in Anytime at All, but I think I understand what John was trying to say. McCartney contributed the instrumental section of the middle 8, in which the guitar and piano more or less double the same part. It's a cool effect that they also use for the solo in the title track. Incidentally, I don't know if you guys can see, there's a reasonable sized spider there on my wall. Can you see him just underneath the bass? He actually looks tiny on the screen here, but he's actually bigger than he looks. And I always feel bad about smashing these guys, so I think I'm going to let him be. As long as he keeps his distance, I think we can cohabitate. Anyway, as usual, this tune has a pretty little melody, especially in the verse. It's another one of these examples of the minor chorus, major verse. The progression during the verse is pretty straightforward. D major is the 1 chord, F sharp minor is the 3 chord, B minor is the 6 chord, and the killer is G minor. It's that 4 minor change. I'm such a sucker for that one. If you need somebody to love, just look into my eyes. I'll be there to make you feel right. I'll Cry Instead is another Lennon tune, this one written entirely by John. And one writer described it as one of John's Stalker songs. It is a little spooky. There were a few of those. Besides this, you've got things like You Can't Do That, Run for Your Life from Rubber Soul. That may be the ultimate example. And even post-Beatles, as late as 1971's Imagine, you've got Jealous Guy, although that one has a bit more of a tender sentiment to it. But there's much more than just the jealous lover theme lurking beneath the surface here. John later described these lyrics as representing his frustrations with success and the loss of freedom. His first wife, Cynthia, said more or less the same thing. She saw these lyrics as a cry for help, being the idol of millions while the freedom and fun of the early days had gone. John often obfuscated what he was really writing about in his lyrics, a prime example being Sexy Sadie from the White Album. It was about his disillusionment with the Maharishi, whom the Beatles had gone to sort of study under in Wales. He wanted to write Maharishi, What Have You Done? but instead it was sexy Sadie, what have you done? So it could have been about a girl at that point. And I really think he's doing the same thing in this song. When he sings, don't want to cry when there's people there, I get shy when they start to stare, I'm gonna lock myself away, but I'll be back again someday. He could be singing about the girl who jilted him, but I really think it's a comment on his feelings of vulnerability from being in the public eye. Next up, we've got Paul's Things We Said Today, which for me is right up there with If I Fell in the running for best songs on this album. In the lyrics, McCartney uses something he referred to as future nostalgia, which is feeling nostalgia for something that's happening right now. We see this clearly in lines like, someday when we're dreaming, deep in love, not a lot to say, then we will remember things we said today. It's pretty rare, but I think we've all probably had those moments in life where right then in the moment, we think to ourselves, someday I'm going to look back on this and I'm going to feel joy, regret, whatever it might be. The lyrics also seem to shift tense pretty freely. He's constantly going back and forth between I, me, you, we, etc. Musically, it's rare for McCartney to write something as relentlessly minor as the verse to this song, but there it is, A minor to E minor 7. You say you'll be mine, girl, till the end of time. The chorus starts off on a brighter note, C major, but then the move to C9 immediately casts some doubt on that brighter mood. Paul accentuates the C9 chord by singing D in his melody. That's the actual ninth of the C9 chord. Someday when we're dreaming. That's a beautiful chord. Then we go to F, which is the sixth chord of A minor. Deep in love, not a lot to say. I love that B flat right there. That's not in the key of A minor. That's sometimes referred to as the Neapolitan chord. It's the flat 2 of A minor, called the Neapolitan chord because of its common usage in Italian opera. It's a bit of a surprise, but then resolves very nicely back to the one chord, down a half step. And the chorus too seems to start out on a brighter note with A major. I love that change, it's so abrupt. Things we said today. But once again, the brighter mood is quickly shattered, this time with a series of moody dominant sevenths. Me, I'm just the lucky kind. Love to hear you say that love is love. I love songs that seem to be fighting this internal battle and can't decide whether to go fully major or minor, and this is a great example of that. The next two tracks are pretty much given over to Stalker John again. I'm telling you, it's really a thing. We've got When I Get Home and You Can't Do That, which I mentioned a bit earlier. Regarding When I Get Home, at first glance, it sounds like, oh, how sweet. He's really looking forward to getting back to his girl. But there's a real undercurrent of anger there. I got a whole lot of things to tell her when I get home. Come on, out my way, 'cause I'm gonna see my baby today. I got a whole lot of things I gotta say to her. It really sounds like she's gonna get kind of a harsh talking to. But the real kickers come later. When I get home tonight, I'm gonna hold her tight. I'm gonna love her till the cows come home. And then I'll love her more till I walk out that door again, which is immediately followed by, come on, let me through. I got so many things I gotta do. I got no business being here with you this way. Wow, that sure sounds to me like he's talking to the side piece there, and saying, so yeah, I got to get back home to the wife. Now, John was married to Cynthia by this point. They had been married since 1962, so definitely some food for thought. John is angry again in You Can't Do That. Well, it's the second time I've caught you talking to him. Do I have to tell you one more time? I think it's a sin. I think I'll let you down and leave you flat because I told you before, oh, you can't do that. Now, John was very candid about his problems with anger and jealousy toward women, but it seemed that he had finally worked that out with Yoko, which makes his assassination in 1980 all the more tragic, I think. Which brings us to the grand finale, I'll Be Back, and I'll bet you anything the inclusion of this song at the end of the record was one of those goofy little jokes that the Beatles like to put into their music. Sort of, okay, that's it for now, but I'll be back again. Kind of like on the White Album where they put Blackbird, Piggies, and Rocky Raccoon consecutive, all the animal titles in a row. These guys really had a goofy sense of humor. As usual, there's tons of interesting things going on here musically. One critic claimed that Lennon simply took the chord progression from Del Shannon's Runaway and made an entirely new song out of it. Now, I don't know if Lennon ever confirmed that. It totally sounds like something he might have done, and it's a great example of how inspiration works. You would never connect those two songs if you just listened to them not knowing anything about music.
As I walk along, I wonder what went wrong with our love, a love that was so strong.
So yeah, not 100%, but the progressions are very, very similar. And by the way, this is just the old Andalusian cadence. It always sounds sort of Spanish. So rest assured, Del Shannon did not invent this progression either. Both songs are in A minor, and it's that descending progression we've heard so many times. You know, if you break my heart, I'll go, but I'll be back again. I love the A major right there. Another really interesting feature is the fact that there are two distinct bridges in this song. The first one appears twice. First time it comes in is following the first verse. It's this bit.
I love you so, I'm the one who wants you. Yes, I'm the one who wants you. Oh, 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 oh.
And then in the middle of the song, we get this one, totally different and really keeps things fresh.
I thought that you would realize that if I ran away from you, that you would want me to, that I got a big surprise. Oh.
This song features no traditional chorus and is loaded with harmonic ambiguity, especially in the outro, which goes back and forth between A major and A minor. George Martin had a stated philosophy of putting the strongest material at the beginning and the very end of an album, and I think this tune definitely fits that bill, although it's the Beatles, so it's not like there were a whole lot of duds floating around. All right, that's going to do it for now. Thanks for hanging out. I know this one went a little bit longer than the videos I've been doing. By the way, let me know if you guys like that or if you like them a bit shorter. See you soon.